I was first introduced to the issue of human trafficking, hearing the story of a 15-year-old girl who was violently abducted from in front of her house and forced into sex slavery. I soon found that this wasn't an isolated incident, but rather a growing trend. As I learned more, I became deeply burdened over those trapped in this nightmarish existence. Determined to fight this great injustice, I set out with a couple friends on a journey across 4 continents to discover the reality of modern-day slavery. Our mission? To unveil the global sex industry, to expose the injustice hidden in the shadows, and to bring back the redemptive stories that inspire hope for true emancipation. My name is Benjamin Nolot, and this is Nefarious, Merchant of Souls.
Fost duse într-un bloc locativ din Belgrad. Proprietarul venea la noi și striga să ne pregătim, că vin cumpărătorii.
Nu sunteți gata! Fuck! Mișcați-vă! Mișcați-vă! Aleniți-vă! Hai că răpiți-vă!
Acești oameni puteau sosi la orice oră. Și noi trebuia să ne dăm hainele jos și să stăm în fața lor. Ne atingeau și ne examinau ca pe niște vite. Ori ne duceau într-o cameră ca să vadă cum ne comportăm din punct de vedere sexual. Râs foarte mult atunci când au dus-o. Și îmi puteam aminti ca privirea speriată din ochii ei și lacrimile ce îi se curgeau pe obraz. Mi-este frică să-mi închid ochii când adorm, pentru că atunci când o fac, tot ce văd este durere. Văd fețele tuturor acelor bărbați și a proxinetului meu.
We went to Moldova first because we heard it was at the epicenter of the trafficking crisis. This is a country where 10% of the population has been trafficked. After the fall of communism in 1991, a severe economic collapse led to half of the entire adult working population leaving the country in search of work. We found that as people were abandoning the country, the children were just being left behind. This created a massive social orphan crisis. Many of these desperate children were winding up in orphanages where corruption runs rampant. We talked to investigative journalist Victor Malaric about this. He spent years in Eastern Europe documenting this crisis.
The serious problem here is that so many directors of orphanages and assistant directors of orphanages know that these girls are going to age out, and they tell traffickers who are waiting at the gates. But no one cares about the orphan because no one knows.
We actually had a chance to meet up with a girl named Anka from a safe house for victims of human trafficking, and she explained what was happening from the inside.
Și spuneți o sumă mare de bani să grămădim și ne spuneți la fete că dacă voi vreți să sară să ieșiți undeva să vă distrați, spuneți că eu știu băieți care eu știu mulți băieți care, da, să plătească și nici n-ați vă atingă, tot să fie bine. Și pe urmă Oleg a aflat că chestiile astea, că vinde fetele. Asta, după cât am aflat, eu i-a dat numărul lui Vasea, că eu aflat că noi suntem de la internat, fără părinți și nimeni n-are cine căuta.
The sad reality, particularly for young women or these young girls in orphanages, is they have no one. They existed in the institution, but once they leave the institution, they go into some kind of vortex and no one knows what happens to them. She's gone. She's disappeared. And you never see them again.
What we saw was that traffickers were setting up employment agencies to target these girls with false promises of legitimate work.
They tell them that they have modeling jobs for them, they have dancing jobs for them, or they have jobs for them in hotels and restaurants as waitresses or maids. And these women want to believe this. They need to believe this because they're desperate.
Cu ambele s-au comportat foarte frumos. Pe urmă, el odată ne-a întrebat pe noi dacă nu vrem să plecăm la Moscova. Și noi l-am întrebat să lucrăm acolo. El a zis că el lucrează, păzește un magazin, dar noi să lucrăm, îi trebuie să niște fete să lucrăm noi în magazin acolo. Da, ca vânzătoare și Dar ne trebuiau bani, atunci pe mine nu avea nici nu mă ajuta și îmi trebuia la examen. Și m-am gândit că poate și bine, dacă noi prindesem încredere între răs. Dar eu tot timpul, eu îl întrebasem chiar pe dânsul, eu zic, Vasi, tu n-ai de gând acolo să mă duci și să mă avinzi de el și cu tine? Cum? Adică fetele astea lucrează acolo și n-aveau să-ți spui că ceva se întâmplă sau... Să-ți placă acolo să vezi. Adică din vorbele lui. Și eu chiar m-am gândit că așa, eu am vrut să-mi fac viața, poate și cum.
Everybody wants a better life for themselves, so they sell you a better life. Oftentimes they come pouring in, unaware of the hell that they're going to be entering. Other times, they'll just look at a young woman and say, we want her, we know she's not going to come, of her own free will, so they'll abduct her.
Да, я сначала согласилась, потом передумала. Узнала о том, что если я туда поеду, могу обратно не вернуться. Когда я им сказала, что я передумала, они сказали, что все хорошо, чтобы я не переживала. После того, как они сказали эти слова, меня закрыли в квартиру в течение 3 дней, пока не был день. к питью, там мы ставили таблетки, как бы не то что таблетки, а лекарства, чтобы я спала и чтобы не шумела. И я в один день пришла в себя, и я хотела убежать. Они меня как бы ударили и сказали, если я еще раз буду пытаться как бы этого сделать, то они знают, что со мной делать.
If a girl would try to scream and shout or something like that, I know that I would do my utmost to shut her up. You just think of how much money this girl can make me. And you don't care what she needs to go through in order to get it.
Organized crime is just anarchy. They don't recognize any authority whatsoever, any enforcement authority. They are a law unto themselves.
Since it's mafia, they know before you walk into that room and start seeing with your eyes how is it operated. They know where you live. They know where your parents work. They know if you have children. They know about your sisters, your brothers. They know everything about you. They don't leave nothing to chance. They're stone cold people. No emotions. You have to be like that if you want to do something in this world.
If they don't like you, they don't just kill you. They'll kill your wife, your children, your brothers, your sisters. And sometimes they'll let you live. And that's the way they work around the world. It's all an issue of fear and intimidation.
Aproape să ieșim din tren, el ne-a luat documentele, le-a pus la dus în geantă. Și Liuda ne-a spus că eu n-am fost adus aici de Vase, că să lucrez în magazin, dar să lucrez cu fetele la trasă, ca prostituată. Și eu n-aveam încotro.
These young women were abducted or tricked and brought to what they call breaking ground houses.
What are the breaking grounds? Could you describe that? What does that mean?
The breaking grounds are apartments and houses out of sight where the women and girls are brought to be what they call seasoned for the profession of prostitution. They are brought into these rooms and they are broken. Their bodies are broken, their spirits are broken, their souls are broken.
Mă judem și plângem, ei pe noi ne puneau să vedem cum bate fetele și spuneți că dacă voi să faceți altfel de greșeli, noi tot așa să ne comportăm și cu voi. Și noi puteau să ne bată de la nic, că ei cinsteau și intrau în cameră și ne băteau pentru nic. Noi tot timpul stăteam cu frică, nu mâncam, știam că iar moș trebuie să-mi ducem, iar să bată cineva joc de mine, să scăp. Eu când am auzit să-mi de la Vase, că eu de grab nu mă duc de acolo, eu credeam că
Sometimes at 3 o'clock at night, you get a phone call. There will be a car waiting for you in 10 minutes. You never know the location where they keep them. You walk into a room that is set up just like a fashion show, with a stage. You sit, you take your seat, lights go off, lights on the stage turn on. The girls walk on the stage, take their clothes off, and start moving around, just like a fashion show. And knowing that when this girl is on stage, that guy already has the next 2 years of her life planned. Sometimes the guy that buys them demands to test the merchandise. Nobody cares about these girls. They turned into an object. Just like you go into the market and you buy yourself a pair of underwear, You go into a different kind of market and you buy yourself a woman. It's hard for the first time or the second time, but you just get to a point where you just say, it's good money.
The girls explained to us how they were transported through these highly sophisticated networks that involved document forgers, smugglers, border officials, taxi cab drivers, all the way down to new owners awaiting them at their destination.
These guys, they take her passport. And these guys, they lock them in a room where they eat, sleep, have sex, everything in the same room. They get treated like dogs, worse than dogs, because they take their dogs out 3 times a day.
What happens if one of these girls wants to escape?
If she gets caught by the pimp, most probably she'll get a good beat up, stay in bed for about a week, and continue to work prostitution.
How do you run away? How does a woman who is from a small little farming village in Moldova finally finds herself in Berlin, doesn't speak German, but has known that in the entire time that she has been trafficked, there were immigration officials, there were border guards, there were customs officials and police officers all getting their hands greased with payoffs?
Fata, după câte am auzit de acolo, a fost legată, odată a încercat să fug și a fost dus în pădure de niște băieți și o legată de copac cu chelea goală. Și o legată-o de copac și o băteau joc de dânsa de acolo. Și întâmplător s-o dat drum, o fugit de acolo de la dâns și a început să alergi pe tras și era cu chelea așa. Și mașina s-a oprit și a luat și a dus-o înapoi la seniori acolo. 4 în ochi. Și tot loc mă uit sau mă stăr mai mult între lume să mă țin, tot timp eu am impresia că mă urmărești. Eu chiar că stau aici, eu tot timp stau cu frică că ei să nu găsească și... Să nu aflu unde ești. Eu tare mult mă tem de asta.
We couldn't fathom what a girl must go through that endures being trafficked, but we met up with a psychologist and longtime anti-trafficking advocate, Dan Allender, to get insight.
You must understand that exploited women are part of systems, mafias, pimps, control, again, manipulation. And the core of that is to break down further any sense of human dignity. It is a form not only of dehumanization, but it literally is bestial and making a woman into an animal.
So when you see these young women on the side streets of big capital cities like Paris and Milan and London and New York, what you see is a woman in total submission. She's going to listen to her master. She will never cross him. And what we see when we look at these women is the gaudy clothes, the cheap makeup, the stiletto heels, the come-hither smiles, and we just write them off as whores, prostitutes that are not worth a moment of our pity or a moment of any thought.
One of the things that really amazed us over the course of our travels is that we saw Eastern European girls everywhere we went, from Israel to Turkey, Dubai, Southeast Asia, back in the US. We saw that they were being exported all over the planet to be used in prostitution.
To understand the connection between prostitution and human trafficking, we met with Melissa Farley. She's a clinical and research psychologist who's studied prostitution for the past 2 decades.
Yes, there's some trafficking into agricultural and domestic labor. Most trafficking, however, is for the purpose of prostitution. And so you always have to look at prostitution. And it's a mystery to me why people don't look for trafficking victims at all of the places where we know prostitution is happening. In strip clubs, in massage parlors, in escort prostitution. That's where they are.
We wanted to follow the path of a girl who was sold into prostitution, so we traveled to Amsterdam, which is the most famous legal market for prostitution anywhere in the world. When we arrived in Amsterdam, our contact took us on a boat tour through the canals of the red light district. Just to see hundreds of these girls for sale in windows was a totally bizarre phenomenon. We were able to track down a prostitution window owner named Slim. He'd been working in the red light district for a couple decades, and we were able to talk to him about what was going on there.
Now this is the operation room or the sex room, what he said. The girl, the customer can wash himself here, and the girl there, and here they do the. And here are the bed. Normally they got towels for me, a bed sheet, and here is the
Panic button.
Panic button. The first time when I'm walking here, I was also walking with my mouth open a bit. After a couple of years, it's normal.
For you, it's a business.
Yeah, usual business. You call a company and you ask if you the favorite type what you like, if you want dark or brown, or you ask it and the girl come to you. It's like you order a pizza, something like that. You can compare it.
What type of girls are there that work here?
Different. At the moment, we have a lot of girls from East Europe, and especially from Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania. But we are allowed to rent rooms to 27 countries.
Most of the girls we had seen in the windows were from Eastern Europe. We couldn't help wondering how many of them had actually been trafficked here. When we tried talking with them, the only words they knew in English were how to give a price for sexual services. But we talked with Denise, who was formerly sold behind the windows for 9 years.
She's selling her body, she gets her money for it. That's what she wants. So if she will have a problem, it's her own fault. That's what most people believe. She's prostituting, it's her own choice.
Is it really a choice?
No. Not even, there's not even one girl who really wants to sell her body. All the time, they have to put on this act and have to watch out at the same time for the people who are watching them to give their money away. Because most of them have pimps. And they all have a story. Every girl who is working here has her own story.
Denise was lured into prostitution by a guy who was pretending to be romantically interested in her. And we found that this was something that was common, not just in Amsterdam, but everywhere prostitution happens.
I promised myself, if I will meet a lover boy, I make sure that he will never catch me. Because I'm not that stupid. But I fell in love with him and started to live together with him. But only because of the fact that he told me, you're so special, you're so beautiful, I love you so much. Until the moment that he's telling you that he has some financial difficulties and that it's maybe possible by prostituting your body to make these little problems go away.
Why do you think the girls want to work here in the red light district?
A lot of them do that for economic way. They need the money because they at the moment they cannot find work. Not normal normal work at the moment is also difficult to find a job at the moment.
The girls who are forced to work in prostitution, they don't earn any money, none at all. So all the money that's earned in this business is profit for the criminals behind it.
From one day to another day, waking up, go to my window. He made sure that there were people around me who were watching after me. Having between 20 or 30 customers every day, from morning till evening late. Getting beat up by him at the moment that I had not enough money. Thinking about getting away from him, escaping. Thinking at the same time, if I would jump out this window, I would break my leg.
Do you care about the girls that work here?
Yes, I care very much about the girls. They have alarm in the room, they have my private number, if they have my number, so they can call me if there is something strange or before there is something, or before there are problems, they can always call me.
So in the legal brothels where they do have protections, they are told, whatever you do, keep your hand very close to hitting the panic button. Really? I thought this was a safe brothel. Why do you need a panic button?
Is it a safe working environment for them?
Here, especially in the windows, is safe.
There was a girl, I think, stabbed a couple doors down here recently. What happened there?
The police is still... hoe zeg je, de politie is nog steeds aan het onderzoeken. They're still investigating this case.
Is there organized crime here in Amsterdam?
I don't want to say that everybody who works here is clean. I cannot say that.
The mayor of Amsterdam, Job Cohen, has recently closed down half of the red light area in Amsterdam. The reason for this, he said, we can't control organized crime. Now, this is a system of legal prostitution that cannot control organized crime. He's right. You cannot control organized crime. In fact, legal prostitution is like setting out a welcome mat for pimps and johns. There is no difference between legal and illegal prostitution. Pimps and traffickers are in both locations, and these are not guys who are interested in the normal social values. These are thugs and criminals, whether they're called legal pimps or illegal pimps, they're the same people.
Don't make the mistake to think that you see a legal business, because the light and the circumstances make it have the effect that it looks as a legal business and the girls are nice to see. But when you look in their eyes and make contact with them, then you can find out that lots of girls want to stop this business and want to go back to the family and back to normal life.
Why haven't the institutions of government been able to effectively stem the tide of this injustice in our world today?
Money, and more money. Mafias run human trafficking. Many of the traffickers are prior drug dealers. When you sell, as one trafficker told me, if I sell a key of cocaine, I sell it one time. If I sell a woman, I get 7 years worth of work minimum. I sell her time again and again and again. So in that sense, it is a business, monetary matter. Well, no mafia anywhere in the world can exist without fundamental government support. So where you're looking at the interplay of corruption, of governments, whether it is high officials, whether it is police, law enforcement, again, this is an issue that we just can't be naive about.
Seeing how girls were brought into the sex trade in Europe was a major wake-up call. But we also wanted to know how girls were winding up in prostitution in other parts of the world. And so we headed to Southeast Asia, which we knew was a hot spot for prostitution.
The first thing that strikes you when you get to Thailand is the beauty of the country. But the next thing that you notice is that prostitution is a major part of their society. In fact, there was one government-sponsored ad that read, "The one fruit of Thailand, more delicious than durian, is its young women." We traveled all across the nation, from Chiang Mai to Bangkok to Pattaya, down to Phuket, and we talked with scores of girls in prostitution who all shared a similar story. Most of them had come from the rural regions of Thailand, and pressured to provide for their parents, they went into the big cities in search of work. The problem is that the Thai government doesn't give these girls citizenship, making it nearly impossible to get a legitimate job. And so they get recruited to work in massage parlors, karaoke clubs, girly bars, no citizenship necessary.
Well, I totally knew that a lot of them weren't there because they wanted to be. Okay, there were a very, very, very small percentage that were, but then usually because of their financial situation, they were there. I went to bed with over 500 girls in 2 years, and because they were there, and they said, "I'm helping my family. I'm helping my family." Their family doesn't respect them no more. They're ashamed of them, but they still want the money.
คือว่าเราต้องการเงินที่จะช่วยในเรื่องของครอบครัวให้น้องไม่ว่าจะเป็นน้องหรือว่าจะเป็นพี่ที่ให้เขากินมีอยู่อย่างแบบใช้จ่ายในแต่ละวันอย่างเพียงพอแต่ในขณะนั้นไม่ได้คิดถึงตัวเองไม่ได้คิดถึงตัวเองเลย
So what they're going to do? If they are working in the factory, they get a 4,000 baht a month. They have 2 kids. What they're going to do? I asked them what they're going to do. So better to be coming down to sell them something else. They get more money, and they have a more beautiful life.
For those indulging in the illicit pleasures, Thailand is like this sexual utopia. But for those who are trapped in the industry, nothing could be further from the truth.
ส่วนมากผู้ชายแสดงออกยังไงส่วนมากก็ให้ไม่ก็จะจับตามเนื้อจับตัวอะไรน่าจะรู้สึกว่าเราเป็นสินค้ามากกว่า
Did the girls enjoy it? Did they like it?
Oh, it should be, yeah. Every time when I'm sitting in the bar, they're quite happy. So it should be they like it. That's why they come and sitting around everywhere. Should be they like it. Should be they like it.
I think initially we had a very narrow conception of what constitutes human trafficking. But being in Thailand, we began to see a broader injustice occurring in the sex industry. These girls hadn't been abducted or physically forced into prostitution. Yet their social conditions had virtually removed personal choice from the equation. We met up with Lauren Bethel to talk about this. She's a known expert in the field and worked with girls in the sex trade in Thailand for 14 years.
I've defined trafficking as the exploitation of vulnerability in any situation. It's the exploitation of vulnerability of economic dysfunction. It's the exploitation of vulnerability of sexual abuse. It's the exploitation of the vulnerability of girls with low self-esteem or boys with low self-esteem. Trafficking is simply an exploitation of vulnerability.
More often than not, you don't need a gun. You don't need to physically drag someone from point A to point B to control, exploit, and use them in prostitution. You simply need to take advantage of the factors that already compel women into prostitution.
This was really a defining moment for us, where we realized that victims of the sex industry extended beyond those who had just been trafficked in the classic sense, to all girls whose vulnerabilities had destined them for prostitution.
Some of them people, they come in looking for the young girls. It means they be in a village. You know, they be in a very poor village and pay the money from the family and get it from the village. But it's not. This is the way it's situation in the most is some few country in the village. If someone they be in a village and they like it and they're gonna talk to with the family because they don't understand any situations, no English, nothing. So just with I like your daughter, I just pay them maybe 100,000 baht. So they can buy and
pay the parents.
Yeah, let's say it's a buy from the parents.
The way Devaj so casually consulted us on how to buy a child from their parents made us wonder if anyone could just buy a child for sex. To investigate this, we went to a small village in the neighboring country of Cambodia, where we heard child prostitution was happening.
When we drove into the city today, we were coming down the street and we actually saw a pedophile.
Hey, buddy. Hey, buddy. You want to shoot this?
Older, probably in his 50s, and we were able to track him down, to chase him down, and to warn him not to come back to this city.
Listen, do not come back to this city ever again. You understand that? You find me here, you're in trouble.
Standing face to face with this man, we were struck by the reality of the situation, that there were literally people flying from across the world to come buy children for sex. We met with Don Brewster, the director of Agape International Missions, and he's been on the front lines of the battle against child prostitution in Cambodia since 2005.
We did some work, some undercover work for IJM in a karaoke bar in Siem Reap. We went in, 200 to 300 girls waiting for us when we get in there, big numbers on their chest. You just pick whatever girl you want. And it's a weird feeling. It's almost like the girls don't know how to feel. Like, please, oh God, don't pick me. Versus, if you don't pick me, how am I gonna have any money? How am I gonna take care of my family? You know, I mean, it must be hell that they have to go through. But you walk into the place and the manager comes up to you and he says, I want you to know, when in the karaoke room, you can do anything you want to the girl. I mean, you can touch her, you can kiss her, whatever you want to do, but you can't have sex before you negotiate a price. Now you get into this karaoke room, gigantic flat screen TV, a high-tech karaoke system with over 2,000 songs in English, 6 cordless mics, beautifully appointed, private bath, 80 rooms like that in this place. This guy owns 8 places like this. That's 16 to 2,400 girls. And we estimate, and we're conservative, that at least a third of them were underage. So you choose your girl, you go to the room, and a woman comes in to police the room. But people would think she comes to protect the girls. She comes to make sure the girls are going after the men, that they're cuddling up to the men, that they're getting the guys to want to have sex, to pay for the big bucks for sex. So we get ready to leave, and I can pay with my credit card, okay? So you pay with your credit card, and here's your receipt that you get. Tiger beer, $4. Bunch of grapes, $5. Karaoke girl for 1 hour, do whatever you want to her, $3. Well, we're getting ready to leave, right? And one of the girls with one of the other guys doesn't want to go. And so she starts running away. Now, we've already paid. She starts to run away. The manager goes, gets her. I mean, literally, as close as you can get to without beating her, screaming at her that she needs to go with us and do whatever we say and smile all the time. So my wife and the counselors talk with them and say, you know, we have a place you can get out of this. We have a place where you can come and we can make sure you get healthy and you'll get good food, you'll get an education. We can help you to have a brand new life. And the three of the girls that we had just wept. They think that there was that opportunity. There was only one thing we needed to do to be able to take them. They needed their mothers to say it was okay. We called all three moms said no. All three mothers said, no, we're not gonna, they can't do it, we need the money. We told them, we'll give you money. We'll actually give you a loan to start your own business. We'll provide all the things you need with it. We'll provide you training and everything you need to start your own business, and your daughter can go get a great education, and when she's done, she can earn way more money, and she'd be in a way better situation. Even after all that, all three mothers said no. And so we had to drive those girls back to the karaoke bar.
I just can't imagine what that must have been like. Could you speak into that or explain that, what that was like?
I don't think so. You know, I mean, I can't. You know, I have 3 daughters and 5 granddaughters, and our granddaughters are almost the age of the girls that we took back. You know, I can't explain it. I can tell you this, that I can't get the pictures of those girls' faces out of my mind still today, and I don't imagine that I ever will.
We could see that poverty had been an underlying factor driving girls into the sex industry. But what we didn't understand is how a parent could sell their own child into sex slavery. So we talked to Helen Sworn. She's been investigating and combating trafficking in Cambodia since 1999.
So we carried out a research, and many people said, you know, the reason that those communities are selling their daughters is because they're the poorest. It's about poverty. So we said, well, let's go in there and really see what's happening in those communities. But we saw in some of these communities, it wasn't actually the poorest families that were selling their daughters. It could be some of the families that wanted to sell them for more luxury items like mobile phones, televisions, that kind of thing.
But across the way, there's 6 men that sit there every day, smoke cigarettes, gamble, and drink beer all day long. From 10 o'clock in the morning to 10 o'clock at night, that's all they do. You say, well, how can they afford to do that? Because they all traffic their daughters. They'll sit there, they could work, but they don't work, and they traffic their daughters every single day.
You know what the reality is? The reality is about 80 to 90% of families are selling their daughters, not 40 to 50%. So we were seeing that what was emerging was a culture of complicity in selling, which was the most frightening phenomenon that we uncovered.
ពេលហ្នឹងខ្ញុំអស់កំមុំហើយណាមួយខ្ញុំឃើញម៉ែខ្ញុំហើយនៅម្ដុំផ្ទះខ្ញុំហ្នឹងវាគេរស់ស៊ីចឹងណាឃ ឃើញគេមានលុយមានអីហើយខ្ញុំក៏ដាច់ចិត្តទៅធ្វើអញ្ចឹងដើម្បីឲ្យយកលុយនោះឲ្យម៉ែខ្ញុំ
What began to happen in communities, if a woman was expecting a baby, if she had a baby girl, they would say to her, you've scored the jackpot. It's okay because you've had a girl. And now if you have financial challenges in your life, you've got this security asset. And if you need to, you can sell her. And people would say, well, they can't love their children then. How would any mother, be complicit in the selling of her child? She must hate her child. She must not think anything of her child.
We had a girl in our center, aftercare center, his family lived here. And so we bring him back for family visits, a supervised family visit. And when I would come with her, she and her mom you would swear her mother loves her deeply. I mean, she would weep when she saw her, she'd hug her and kiss her, but she trafficked her every day before she was rescued. And I talked to these 6 pastors individually, these 6 Vietnamese pastors, and I said, I just don't understand that. How can that be? How can you tell if the mom really loves the daughter? And all 6 of them individually said to me, well, was she trafficked locally or away? If she was trafficked away, that means they don't really love her. But if they traffic her locally where they get to see her, that means they love her. I mean, how can you understand that?
ហើយពួកយើងចង់ដឹងថាបងមានអារម្មណ៍បែបណានៅពេលដែលធ្វើជាស្រីរស់ស៊ីមនុស្សភេទទេពិបាកខ្លាំងពេលគ្រប់ពេលដែលខ្ញុំចេញទៅពេលដែលខ្ញុំដូចតំណែងមួយអញ្ចឹងគេតថ្លៃគេយកទៅតាមចិត្តហើយគេឲ្យលុយហើយក្នុងចិត្តខ្ញុំពិបាកខ្លាំងហើយខ្ញុំឈឺចាប់ខ្លាំងទៀតប៉ុន្តែខ្ញុំអត់មានជំរឿ
We knew that the mothers as much as the fathers were responsible for selling their daughters. We also knew that those daughters, for them, it was about an honor relationship with their parents. So because their parents had brought them into the world, they then had a debt honor to pay back to their parents for bringing them into the world. So we were seeing that some of these girls that were approaching adolescence were actually grooming themselves, knowing that they were going to be sold. They'd seen it happen to families that were around them, so they knew what was happening. So they would groom themselves because they wanted to honor their parents. For them, if the parents could get more money for them, wouldn't that be a greater sense of honor for them as a daughter?
If we walked around and I pointed to the girls, I don't know if I could point to 10 girls that aren't being trafficked. The truth is, it's not, again, look at that little girl out there. If she was your little girl, would you sell her? If you didn't have enough food, would you say, oh, I can afford to get rid of her so I can have food? You wouldn't do it for food. You wouldn't do it for medicine, right? So, I mean, that whole idea that poverty is an issue really takes a big leap. How could that really be an issue that you choose your daughter? You choose to sacrifice your daughter.
Before we left Swaipak, we gathered children from the village together to teach them some songs and dances. And right as we're doing this, a pimp pulls up on a moped, and he's angry because he needs to get one of these children out for a client who had come into town. And our host explained to us that most of the very same children that we were singing and dancing with were currently being trafficked. In our travels, we met girls who were exploited through their orphan status, through poverty, through statelessness, and even by their very own parents. And while most see karaoke clubs or girly bars or massage parlors or even brothels, for these girls, they were nothing more than prison cells. But back in the US, we saw an entirely new face of this issue, and that is girls drawn into the sex industry by the allure of glamour and prosperity.
I got off the plane and I looked at the strip and I was like, oh my gosh, there's famous people in those casinos. And I'm gonna meet somebody that's a millionaire and I'm gonna get married to him and I'm gonna take all their money.
I'd watched the movie Pretty Woman and I was like, well, gosh, look at her. You know, she's beautiful and she's making money and, you know, she's meeting guys and she fell in love with this guy and she's living in this nice hotel suite and has everything she wants and she's falling in love. Man, I need to become a hoe. That's what I thought. So that's what I did.
To understand the draw of glamorized prostitution, we met with Annie Lobert. Annie spent 16 years as a high-class call girl in Las Vegas.
I sold my body to a Japanese man. And it was real easy to do, by the way. People ask me, what did you feel like? Empowered. I felt like, wow, if I can do this with every guy I meet, I'm gonna be a millionaire pretty soon. It was like, woo, Pandora's box, like Lord of the Rings, putting on that ring and just going, oh, power, money, you know? And I thought all my dreams can come true. I can go to college. I always wanted to go to college, couldn't afford it.
So I chased that lifestyle. I wanted the glamour, I wanted everything that came along with it, and I thought that it was the cool thing to do because everybody else was doing it. My mom was a prostitute. My grandma was actually a prostitute. So I just thought, you know, this is what I'm destined to do. This is what my life is supposed to be.
You go out there and you walk around the casinos and you look for single guys or a group of guys. They're kind of just walking by themselves, looking lonely, and you just, anything to start up a conversation. Hey, do you know what time it is? You know, anything. And, you know, they eventually, you know, get into the subject of, hey, you want some sex?
A lot of ladies like to fornicate, like to have sex, you know, just like us guys. And so, you know, just to make a little humor here, I mean, if a woman wanted to pay me and I was attracted to her, I would, off the record, I wouldn't mind doing that too.
When you first start doing it, it's exciting, it's glamorous, it's like, wow, I got power. And you get stung eventually, whether it be 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, once you get beat up a couple times and threatened with your life and you almost lose your life.
I experienced nothing like Pretty Woman. It's totally different. The real world, it's totally different.
It's all an act. In the course of my nearly 30 years as a prostitute, I got to know hundreds of prostitutes, and I can honestly say I don't know one person who enjoyed it.
We talked with Helena Evans, who gave us a sobering glimpse behind the veneer of prostitution. She was on the streets at 14 and wound up in prostitution for the next 26 years.
One particular night, I was in a car and we was going out into the country. We were supposed to be going to my house, and then he took a detour. I said, where are you going? And he wouldn't answer me. And I thought, oh, this is pretty weird, you know? And I said, listen, stop the car, because I'm going to get out. He said, you're not going anywhere. There's only one place you're going tonight, and that's hell. And I could tell the way he said it, that he was really serious. And I tried to open the door, and I couldn't open the door. So I started kicking him out, you know, because he was driving. And so I started kicking him, and I was trying to get my foot over to press the lock to open my door. In the end, I ended up opening my door, and we were in the middle of nowhere. He was a big guy, you know, I'm a woman, and we started this wrestling. And honestly, it's awful when you know there's somebody who really wants to kill you. And I could feel my strength leaving me. And because first of all I was punching him, then he put his hands around my neck and I began to get all dizzy. And I thought that I was going to die and I really cried out to God. And thank goodness this car came along. And this was an absolutely deserted road. Normally a car would not come along. And this guy just drove off. He was later sent to prison. But that, most of us have stories like that.
I've been held hostage at gunpoint, raped, robbed, strangled, beaten up, everything by customers. So they're not all good.
Did you ever feel an element of fear from any of these girls?
Like they were afraid?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, several times I would feel that they were definitely afraid of what they were involved in, but they just had to do it. It's like a job. You know, most people don't like their job, but they have to go do it to pay their bills. So it became like a job to them, something they had to do.
Even the people who promote prostitution will put out helpful fact sheets on how to avoid getting killed. They don't say it exactly that way, but they put out a fact sheet that says, well, when you go into a hotel room when you're servicing a John, drop something on the floor and kick it under the bed so you can look under the bed and see if there's a gun or handcuffs there. Don't wear a scarf because that can be used to strangle you. Don't wear super high heels to an escort alcohol because you can't run fast enough. Now, this is information coming from people that are promoting prostitution as a good job.
One of the stats we dug up from prostitution research and education was that women in prostitution had a mortality rate that was 40 times higher than the national average. One predominant fact began to stand out to us. Peril is a basic fact of prostitution. But we wondered why anyone would endure the same abuses day after day when they could simply choose to leave prostitution at any time.
Why is it so difficult for girls to get out?
Because they're pimps. It's so difficult for girls to get out of it because they're brainwashed. And it's all that they've ever known. They feel like there's no help because there really isn't no help out there.
A woman generally doesn't get onto the streets without an ally, often called a pimp. And that person is controlling her, shaping, often providing her with drugs, but also with violence.
Every time that I got out of pocket, I got beat down for it. And we're talking like brutally beat, where I couldn't work.
I woke up to a gun being cocked in my mouth, you know, and it just scared me so bad. He had me call my family and say goodbye to them. And then, you know, I went back to him after a while because I felt like, you know, that's just who I'm supposed to be with. That's supposed to be, you know, this is what my life is.
No woman is on the streets because she just likes sex and or wants money. This is a system of utter manipulation. It's a system of exploitation, manipulation, threat, violence, but all fundamentally under the fear and deep sense of shame that I have no value.
He knew I was leaving a couple different times and he'd come home and do this, I call it psychopath warfare, to get me to think that he was gonna kill me. Put guns in my mouth, put gun to my head and said, I'm gonna do it, I'm in love with you. He would say, I'm so in love with you. If you leave me, I'll kill myself. And he'd put the gun in my head. And it's like, oh, no, don't kill yourself, I love you. Please don't do it to me. And you know, just the games, the psychological games were just incredible. And you know, when you're in love with someone, you fall for that. And some people say, well, you're stupid. No, really, when you're in it at the time, it makes sense.
You have what's called the Stockholm Syndrome, which implies that a victim can eventually come to identify with her captor when you've been taken captive. And your very survival depends on, in one sense, the care, loosely used, that word, the care of your captor. Then in some ways you bond to that captor, even if they at times literally torture you, violate you, demean your dignity. They're your only source of life.
She had a pimp who would say to her, unpredictably, down. And she would have to lay down in a certain spot in the room, just like a dog, until he told her she could get up. There's no reason for that except to demonstrate to the girl that he has absolute control over her. So that if he knows he can tell her down, he certainly can tell her, get out there, do not come back until you've got $1,000 cash in your hand.
I mean, the goal of the trafficker is to break you down so that you are under his control. That kind of power over a person leads you to a point where your only basis of survival feels like dissociation. And dissociation really is a flight from reality. It is a disconnection from engagement with the world around you. For the person who's been traumatized to levels of almost concentration camp cruelty, there is no way but to go more and more and more to the interior and to leave the exterior world for other people to control. It's almost as if the soul dwindles and literally gets more and more and more invisible.
Other techniques of mind control include the creation of a part of the personality that prostitutes, so that there might be Jeannie, who's the young woman who has a kid at home and girlfriends in high school, and then Veronica is the prostituting part. And because you can't prostitute without splitting part of the self psychologically, that Veronica is deliberately created by pimps. Pimps will say, I'm not talking to Jeannie right now, I want Veronica. Come on, get out here, Veronica. And so Veronica has a different look on the face, different clothes, different behaviors, and the child splits off that part of the self that has to prostitute for 6 or 8 or 10 hours.
And as a consequence, it's usually a 6 to 8 year period of time before she has AIDS, another sexually transmitted disease, or is literally killed. So it's not a long life these young girls have, but by the time they become 20, 21, 22, they are jaded beyond all comprehension.
I've got friends right now that don't even want to continue, that are working in the sex industry, that are so sad right now, that are so hooked on drugs, that are so devastated with why they've done what they've done. And all their tricks think they're having a great time. It's I would call it the greatest acting job in the world. The last stage of prostitution is absolute despair, depression, depravity, lost. You're at this tunnel with no vision, dead end, and you're like, where do I go from here? I've wrecked my whole life. And you realize everything that you thought that you could make from prostitution was just all like a mirage. It's like you were chasing it and chasing it and chasing it, but you never came to it.
Advocates of prostitution often employ the term choice to imply that those who are working in the industry are free and empowered. And on the surface, we saw girls who appeared to have chosen this lifestyle. But the more that we listened to their stories, the more we began to see a pattern that preceded this so-called choice.
Why do you think so many of them are winding up in that situation?
I think it's because a lot of them have my type of background. I've spoken, I suppose, I mean, it must have been on 100 girls, probably more, about their past and everything, and like nearly all of them has been sexually abused. In fact, I can't think of one that hasn't.
Sexual abuse is probably one of the core factors for how a woman gets onto the streets in a position of being exploited, and that's across the world. Abuse is a phenomena where in the US we're looking at 1 out of every 3 women, 1 out of every 4 men. But in terms of prostitution, you're looking at 95% of the people who are in those exploited positions have a prior history of being violated.
One pimp actually said You know, I have to thank those dads. They're the ones that started her out in her training, and I just picked up where the dad or the stepdad or the neighbor left off. There's a lot of truth in that, a great deal of truth in that. The sexual abuse of children in the United States and in every other country is a horror that most of us fail to acknowledge and address. And it's not a stranger in a trench coat on the playground. It's a family member or a friend who's doing the sexual abusing.
This guy was actually living with us, and I got raped when I was 10 in my own house, in my bed. I feel like, you know, if somebody's gonna take it, might as well just give it up. It changed my whole life when that happened, you know? Like, it's crazy how one event can make your whole life just crumble.
That's where the child is taught what she's worth, which is not much. And that's where she's taught this is what she has to do in order to get the things all children want in life, which is love and affection.
When a young woman is abused in the context of her own family, and that could be in Nigeria, that could be in the United States, there is a sense of hopelessness and despair and shame that eventually brings a person to a point where they ultimately have no value for themselves and or for their body. As a consequence, they are so susceptible to the manipulation of others.
When I was about 5 years old, I was regularly abused by a family member who used to come home drunk, and often in a blackout he would get in bed with me thinking that I was my mother. When I was 14, a man offered me money, and I couldn't believe that somebody would actually pay for it when they could just take it from me, because I didn't think I owned my sexuality. I thought I was there for the taking, and for anybody to steal this from me was perfectly okay. And when somebody offered me money, I was like blown away. I mean, it wasn't a small amount of money, not to a 14-year-old, you know.
And that's how many children start in prostitution. The average age of entry into prostitution is 13 to 14 years in the US.
We came to the conclusion that there's really no way you can qualify a person's choice to enter prostitution when most have a background of sexual abuse and have entered prostitution underage. In most cases, from what we had seen, it wasn't so much an issue of girls choosing prostitution as it was prostitution choosing them.
Our attention really turned at this point to how do we put an end to this? In Amsterdam, the legal model of prostitution was promoted as ensuring healthier and safer working conditions for the girls. But that was hardly our experience in going there. However, in Sweden, we heard about a progressive form of legislation that was making great strides at eradicating sex trafficking there. Once we got to Sweden, we met up with Kasia Wahlberg, the nation's head detective combating trafficking.
Since 1999, the purchasing of sexual services is criminalized in Sweden. So this was the protection of acts from acts of violence against women, actually, and also the thought that you will never reach equality between men and women truly, as long as you have a subgroup of women that are being exploited sexually.
Swedish law on prostitution is aimed at stopping prostitution because they understand it to be a form of violence against women, and they are an abolitionist law. How does that law work? that controls organized crime so incredibly well. They arrest men for buying sex. And the penalty is a serious one. It would be a U.S. felony level offense, or it would be an offense that warrants jail time.
We usually say that it's a human right not to be in prostitution and not to exploit and buy and sell people for sexual exploitation. Men must start to learn how to fulfill their sexual desires instead of exploiting another person, because prostitution is about men masturbating in women's bodies, nothing else.
Women in prostitution are not arrested. They're offered services for escape. And of course, pimps and traffickers are arrested. But they essentially create a very, very bad business environment for pimps and johns.
Traffickers and pimps, they complained when we wiretapped them. We overheard the telephone conversations that they would speak about Sweden as a bad market because the buyers were afraid of getting caught. And traffickers and pimps could not easily send women out in street prostitution because the police or social service or other women in prostitution, they would easily find out.
In Sweden, we found that protecting the sanctity of human life was more important to them than fostering the unbridled sexual appetites of men.
It has a social implication in terms of the way that people even view women in this case and value them. And it creates an atmosphere of safety, an atmosphere of dignity in the country. And so here it's 2 o'clock in the morning. We can walk freely through the streets, feeling no threat of danger. The last time that somebody was actually even murdered in prostitution in Sweden was 1989, which is over 20 years ago. Incredible.
Sweden has the lowest rate of trafficking in the European Union. If you want to stop trafficking, you must stop prostitution.
Sweden's model provided a ray of hope for us in terms of combating sex trafficking as an industry. But there was still this issue of girls left out there, girls still trapped in prostitution. And when we first embarked on our journey, we envisioned rescuing girls trapped in cages. But the issue of human trafficking was far more complex than we originally anticipated. And it seemed like every place that we went, the barricade confining girls in prostitution grew more and more impenetrable, from the government corruption and organized crime in Europe to the statelessness and poverty and parental complicity in Southeast Asia, to just the general psychological chains that bind girls in prostitution. Rescue efforts seemed to be a nearly impossible task.
In the last couple of years, 3 years actually, the anti-trafficking police, NGOs, 3 NGOs, have worked in SWIPOC. They've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they've rescued 1 girl. You know, people say education. If we just educate them, if we just get them good jobs, if we do development, well, hell, millions of dollars have been spent on both, and the situation continues to get worse. I mean, what proof do we need? Is education and development solved evil in the West? I mean, what has that done? Nothing. We have all the evidence in the world that education and money does not get rid of evil. It isn't a money and education issue. It's a moral, it's a spiritual issue.
What we began to realize was even a greater challenge than rescuing the girls was restoring them once they'd been rescued. In fact, we found that most girls, even after they've been rescued, still suffer with nightmares of their former life, which makes coping with everyday life pretty unbearable.
How many women do you know that have been brutally abused who never leave therapy? As a former pastor who did counseling, I can tell you most of the women continue in counseling the rest of their life. And they'll tell the story in detail and they'll talk about, but they're thinking, really, you could change that word to faith. What they really believe doesn't change. And to really change that, it takes more than a counselor. It takes more than the words of a staff that's going to come alongside the girl and say, you're really good, this is good. Because remember, the world out there, the world they live in, are telling them they're trash.
What was really going on inside?
I hated myself. I hated myself so much, and I started to think that my mother was right about never accepting me like her daughter. That it was not worth it to live anymore. You know, there's only one thing what it does. It destroys your body. It destroys your life. Your thoughts, your heart especially.
That's what you start to feel and truly spiritually believe in your heart, that you are just a whore, that you're just a prostitute, that you're no good, that as soon as you get older, as soon as you get fat, as soon as there's a wrinkle on your forehead, that no one's gonna want you. And regardless of you getting paid, no money is worth the disgrace and the shame and the destruction that it does to a woman's heart and soul. It is devastating, trust me.
I knew that there was something wrong. I felt almost subhuman, and I was very ashamed. I was frightened to tell anybody that I couldn't feel love, or I couldn't feel compassion or anything like that, you know, because I thought there was something wrong with me.
What was so tragic is that many of the girls who had been rescued were retreating back to prostitution just to regain a sense of normalcy.
Why a woman would choose to stay in a situation where she is being abused. Why is that? Even when they're offered alternatives, why? Why would they choose to stay? And I've often said that the abuse that we know is sometimes better than the future that we don't know.
We know by the statistics that you take a girl out of prostitution, 96 out of 100 within a year are back in it, unless deep, profound care over a lengthy period of time is provided to be able to begin to restore that sense of dignity and future for that child.
I'd rather not ever do it again, because I feel like every time I sold my body to somebody, I was selling my soul. Every time I worked, it was just piece of me is going every single time, and I was tired of having that empty feeling inside of my body, inside of my body, inside of my soul.
Let me tell you the story of one girl. For 2 months, every single day, this big, fat ex-Marine rapes this little 12-year-old girl. You know, she writes she writes her story as part of our therapy. She writes her story out, and she says how worthless she knew she was then. She said, I know I'm just a piece of garbage, and my life is ruined. And why does he do this to me? Why would he do this to me? Hopelessness is just it's such a weak word. Such a weak word for what she feels. It's beyond hopeless to, do you ever feel guilty about something you've done? Right, you never, and maybe sometime I felt really guilty before. Well, if you can imagine the worst you've ever felt for something, the very worst, multiply it by 10 and live like that for a year or two. Every day, feeling that pain and thinking that's what you're worth, that's what your life is, and not understanding how this could happen to you. How could this happen to me?
What type of emotions did you feel? What were you experiencing during that time?
Intense fear. Intense fear. A real rejection. of feeling totally loved and wanted and cared for. I just felt totally lost within myself.
And so that's when the heavy, heavy cocaine abuse came in. And I just wanted to disappear. I remember just lighting that pipe and just looking forward to that hit. All of a sudden I heard my ears just ringing really loud. And like everything went black. Like my eyes just shut down. My eyes were wide open, but went black and I fell back. And I was having a heart attack. The pain in my chest was like, my heart was going, and it was like, I felt like somebody was stabbing me with a knife in my heart, but I couldn't see anything. And all I could remember was that, there was nothing but blackness around me. And just, I realized, crap, I'm dying. I'm dying. And all I could remember is Jesus. That's all I could think about was God. And I saw my life literally flash before my eyes. And as I called upon his name, I just said, Jesus, Jesus, I'm alone. I'm sorry, and come and get me. Save me from myself. I'm sorry. And all I could do was like say sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I was a prostitute. I was so ashamed. And the ambulance came. They took me in the hospital, and the doctor came over and said, do you know how lucky you are? You have a lot of drugs in your system, lady, and you're allergic to narcotics. And he's like, God's with you. And I knew that Jesus heard my prayer.
I was in such despair and desperation. I would really cry out to God, And then one night, he appeared to me in a dream. I would go into this beautiful garden, and sat on the bench was the Lord Jesus. And I would go to him, we would sit, and we would just talk about, I don't even know what we spoke about, but he never, ever once condemned me.
I said, Jesus, I just want to see you. I want to know what you look like. I don't care about the movies I've seen. I just want to see you. I want to talk to you, I want to see you. And so he granted my request. I had a dream of him one night, and he came to me, and he didn't look anything like any picture, any person I've ever seen before. He was the most handsome man I've ever seen, beautiful. And he came to me and went this close to my face and looked into my eyes and read me from my baby until my perfect age that I was, everything I've done. Didn't say a word to me and looked at me with love in his eyes like, I love you.
It was such beauty and such love that emanated from him. I fell at his feet. I was like a dead person. And believe me, at that particular point in my life, I wasn't scared of much, but I was, and it wasn't like a fear he's gonna hit me. It was like who he was, who he really is. And I fell at his feet, and I just cried, and I said, Lord, I'm so sorry for what I've done. And when I got up, he'd say, Helena, I'm waiting for you. And it was so beautiful, so gentle. So gentle. And that went on for about 6 months. I was always waiting for him to say a harsh word or condemn me, but he didn't.
He said, I love you. You're healed, you're whole, you're delivered. And just like this fire was lit in me. And I just started to weep. And I just realized, God loves me. No matter what I've done, no matter all the mistakes I've made, no matter how many people I've hurt, he still loves me. and he can make something of my life.
To think that he took me, I was nothing. When he found me, I was laying in a bed. I hadn't had a bath for a year. I was covered in abscesses where I'd skin pop stuff, I'd missed veins, I'd cut myself. I was stinky, I was smelly, I was rotten. And he took me and he made me something beautiful. And to me, that is so wonderful. That is so worth giving my life to. And I just think he is so wonderful. And I don't want to stop talking about him because my heart just fills with joy. And I just want everybody to know about him, you know? I mean, it's just amazing.
You think he loves you?
Oh, I know he loves me. Yeah, I know he loves me. And it's real.
He's jealous for me. Love's like a hurricane. I am a tree bending beneath the weight of his wind and mercy. When all of a sudden I am unaware of these afflictions eclipsed by glory, and I realize just how beautiful you are and how great your affections are for me.
It's a happy ending to the story. Okay, she gets rescued. She comes to us. And she begins to realize that she is a child of God, that she's a princess, a daughter of the king. When she finished her therapy, she said, you know, she goes, now I know the truth about me. You know, God loves me, and I have so many people here who love me that there must be something good about me. And I know that if I just try hard, I will have a great future. That God will give me a great future no matter what happened in my past.
God made it possible for me to get out of this world. He's loving me even though I was selling my body, even though I was destroying my body as many times as I could do at that moment. But his love is so unconditional and he still loves me every day.
I'm ashamed that I used to be a person like that. I can't even call myself a person. It's sad. It's really, really sad. But God is bigger than that. I was captive of one thing, she was a captive of another thing. But God wants to set the captives free.
Yeah, he loves us. Oh, how he loves us. Oh, how he loves us. Oh, how he loves.
Having reached the end of our journey, it became very clear that a new one was just beginning. Our eyes have been opened to our world in a way we have never seen it before. The people we met, the faces we saw, and the stories we heard have made us different and changed the course of our lives. We have been struck with a wound that we pray we never recover from. Famous abolitionist William Wilberforce once said, "If to be feeling alive to the sufferings of my fellow creatures is to be a fanatic, then I am one of the most incurable fanatics ever permitted to be at large. In addition to his tireless legislative work, we looked at 3 things Wilberforce did that were so effective at combating slavery. Number 1 is prayer. He understood slavery to be a spiritual battle, and he paved the way for abolition through prayer. The second thing was awareness. He thrust the injustice of slavery into the conscience of a nation. Third, he gave money. He was a generous financial supporter of the efforts to combat slavery. The crisis of modern-day sex slavery does not need interested observers. It needs incurable fanatics.
like drugs by the candlelight. The feeling's numb, but the pain's not gone. She holds her breath while they carry on. She fought real hard, she fought back then. Now she's giving up, now she's giving in. She's so confused, she's losing her mind with love abuse and twisted lies. They even changed her name. They even changed her name. They even changed her name. Now just look what they did with it. Her price was high, but she's dealt the same. The lot of a slave that a girl became. She feels like she has lost her soul. The breath in her lungs is growing cold. Rolling lines inside her head. They buried hope with the words they said. They even changed her name. They even changed her. It mirrors hell, a plague inside a human's mind. To lock the doors and close the blinds. A human life is thrown in a cage, raped till death and thrown away. Deeds in the dark, the light reveals, and judgment comes when the blood is spilled. They even changed her name. They even changed her name. They even